ALS network, and so on and so forth. And of course, the Canadian Open Parkinson's Network, whose leader is Dr. Munshi, as you know. So, what are our research groups? First of all, the scientific director of the Neuro is Dr. Edward Fond, that I'm sure some of you know. So I'm just going to go over the groups. I mean, there's a lot of people and a lot of activity, and I won't go into huge detail. But it's to say that we have a very important brain tumor group led by Kevin Petreka. And really there, the aim is to understand the biology of tumors, a lot of single cell sequencing. I can say that in the past 5 years, Kevin Petreka, his work, 1 year was the discovery of the year by the magazine Découverte. And another year, he made the top 10 discoveries of the year. And so a lot of innovative work going on in brain tumors, maybe a little less interesting to your institution, but certainly something that we're doing. Cognitive neuroscience, which is very, very relevant to what you do. A long history. We still have Brenda Milner, and we had the Brenda Milner Day yesterday. She's going to turn 104. She's only 103. And she handed in her resignation in September at the age of 103. So she is quite a remarkable person, and was the founder of the Cognitive Neuroscience Group. Now, the head of the group is Leslie Fellows, who is a cognitive neurologist, very accomplished researcher. This is a very important group that we've been rebuilding because the group had many people who were older, like Brenda Milner, but there's also like Michael Petrides, who's also, he's still very active, but you know, the future of the group is not people who are in their 70s, but rather people who are more in their 30s and 40s. So this is a group that's being rejuvenated. And I should mention, I just saw, I've recruited 70 people in the past 9 years to McGill University, of which 45 are at the Neuro. So there's been a lot of recruitment going on at the Neuro and at McGill in the neurosciences. And it's really been aimed at the rejuvenating many of these activities. The epilepsy, of course, epilepsy was the central disease at the Neuro in the early days. It's what worked on, was the work of Penfield, who established what's called the Montreal procedure, which is the first surgery for epilepsy. The person in charge of that group is Dr. Birgit Frauscher, another young recruit, a neurologist specialized in epilepsy, who does work on electrophysiology. But that group does a lot of brain imaging and works a lot to try to identify the foci of epilepsy to be able to facilitate surgery or enable surgery. There's a neural circuit group with Christopher Pack is the head. And this group really is involved in really a lot of basic research, a lot of animal research. This group kind of is close to the epilepsy group, close to the cognitive neuroscience group, and basically collaborates with all these different groups. There's a neurodegenerative group led by Ziv Ganor. So Ziv Ganor is a young recruit, as is Birgit Frauscher. And this group focuses on two diseases, essentially. One is on Parkinson's disease. And so there's a very important group doing genetics, molecular biology, single cell biology of Parkinson's disease. And there's a group that work on amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, the biology of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, genetics, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the groups. We have the neuroimaging and neuroinformatics group, and that is mixed in with the Brain Imaging Center, but this is a research group. And this research group has 29 faculty, including people like Alan Evans and such. So a group that has been very active in research and developing methodologies. There's the neuroimmunology disease group. This is a group that has shrunk over the years. We've had difficulties recruiting this group, but we've just recruited a couple of young scientists and a couple of young neurologists, and we have a new recruit starting in July that does genetics of neuroimmunological diseases, primarily multiple sclerosis. They do a lot of work characterizing microglia, both from humans and in animal models. Neurodevelopmental Disease Group, this is a new group. One thing that we've been working on more and more at the Neuro is neurodevelopmental diseases. And so this group works a lot on how the brain wires correctly, what goes wrong in neurodevelopmental diseases, how can we better treat these diseases. And the leader of that group is Wayne Sauce. And then there's the Rare Neurological Disease Group, used to be the Neuromuscular Disease Group, headed by Bernard Bray. And this group does a lot of genetics and molecular biology, as well as clinical trials. So, our platforms. This is a very important platform that was created maybe 6 or 7 years ago. The director is Jason Karamchandani, who is a neuropathologist. And this is more than a biobank. First of all, it's completely open. And so you can go on the internet, look to see what there is, and you request whatever it is that you want. And everything is freely available. The only things where there's work that needs to be done, well, first of all, there has to be ethics, but when there's work that needs to be done by us is when somebody wants something limited. So we have a piece of brain of a patient. Piece of brain is yay big. And so we have to be certain that it's well used. And so this is a repository that has patient information, so clinical data. It has biological samples of different kinds, from blood to urine to stool to skin biopsies, etc. There's brain imaging data, there's neuropsychology data, there's longitudinal clinical data, and there's genetic data. And of course, all the different individuals in this group, there are about 3,000 now that have been collected. And so there's variable amounts of data, but our aim is to build this. And so if somebody, wants our patients with Parkinson's disease and wants to do genetic studies, the data of the genetic studies comes back into the biorepository. And so it's something that is growing. Okay. There's what we call the Early Drug Discovery Unit, and the leader of this is Thomas Durkin. So this is something that has been growing very much at the Neuro. This is based on iPSCs, induced pluripotent stem cells. We have over 100 now, induced pluripotent stem cells that we have created. And what we do basically is we collect the patients and they donate the cells. The cells are reprogrammed into iPSCs. Sometimes we use CRISPR-Cas9 to correct the mutation when it is a mutation. And then we develop models. And so here we work with industry to develop industry-grade disease-relevant models that are then used for low, intermediate, or high-throughput screening of various molecules to identify what we think would be lead molecules in these different diseases. And all this is done in the open. So the notion is that if we find a molecule that acts on a target A, then we will give all that data and people can figure out that target A is good for the treatment of, say, Parkinson's disease. So we have the microscopy cellular imaging facility. We have 10 advanced microscopes. It serves many different laboratories. So I think, most institutions have a microscopy unit. We have a couple of these super resolution microscopes that go beyond the normal resolution of light. So that can be quite interesting. We have an animal facility, Center for Disease Models. Janet Green, Lisa Volume are in charge. And this, of course, is like rodents and such, but we also have an increasing number of non-human primates. So, and we've just recruited somebody who works on non-human primates, particularly marmosets. There's the McConnell Brain Imaging Center. At the head of Julien Doyon, that some of you probably know. Sorry, we stole him from you, but in fact, he's the one who decided he wanted to come. So, and we're quite happy with him. Good export from your institution. So we have PET cameras. We have high-resolution PET, micro PET, and now we're having installed we're a beta test site for what is the highest resolution PET scanner in the world. And that's going to be operational, we think, this summer. It's constructed actually by a company based in Sherbrooke. So that's quite interesting. We have a cyclotron. It's aging, but it still works. And so we make actually the largest collection of radiochemicals of any institution in Canada. We have a 3T and a 7T research MRI, and we have a real-time MEG EEG. We do a lot of scans, and we have a lot of trainees, and over 100 different researchers use our brain imaging center. And we've developed a lot of neuroinformatics because of the increasing big data. So that's, I think, a center that has a lot of links with your center because of your own imaging expertise. We have a clinical research unit. This, I think, is not as well known. It's the largest neurological clinical unit in Canada. We do phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and post-approval trials. Most are industry sponsored, but we have quite a few investigator-initiated trials. We have right now, it's actually 140 ongoing trials and over 1,000 patients seen in the past year. So, I mean, this is basically the flow. But if you go on the industry databases, you'll see that we are doing about 15% of all the clinical trials in all the fields of medicine in Canada. We're involved in about 15%. So very, very active clinical trial unit, which is actually self-funded. Talking about money, this is the research budget, administration salaries, 11 million, grants, including infrastructure, 36 million, and philanthropy, 27 million. That's in the past fiscal year. And we also have the hospital budget, which is about $26 million. So almost $100 million is what runs the Neuro. So now I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to talk about becoming an open science institute. Why and how. And I believe that your institution is also kind of thinking about this direction. And so I thought I would go in a little bit more detail in this. So I guess the first question is, well, what is open science? Well, to accelerate discovery, deliver cures, and essentially, well, this is one definition. Open science has many definitions. So this is one that we like. Open science is the idea that scientific knowledge of all kinds should be openly shared as early as is practical in the discovery process. And the Neuro, this is a plaque at the Neuro, basically dedicated to relief of sickness and pain and the study of neurology. So we think that, the motivations for adopting open science is we think that this is going to benefit patients. I don't know if you know Ben Stretcher, probably Uri knows Ben Stretcher. He's a patient advocate based in Toronto, and he was at our symposium 2021. And essentially he said, the neurons in my brain are dying faster than science is progressing. And so that's kind of a message from patients that, those who are sick now really are looking for help. It also takes increased collaboration. I don't have to tell you guys, the brain is complicated, and it takes a world to understand the brain. And so we need to work together because it is very complicated. And the other thing is that, in the 21st century, there's an incredible amount of data being generated all over the world. And so open science basically takes advantages of the computational an interconnected world to improve reproducibility, replicability, and statistical power. I'll just give an example. So during this wonderful pandemic, which I think was particularly hard for people who do research on human subjects, you know, I actually interviewed the different heads of the researchers, and asked them, you know, what they were doing. And basically, a lot of them were using open data, and their students were working in open data. And there was no open data, it would have been far worse. So, I mean, the open data, I think, is extremely important. So, how did we become an open science institute? I think that's very relevant. It's not that I woke up one morning and said, "Oh, we're an open science institute." It's not the way it works. We did really a grassroots kind of campaign, which is essentially what we wanted to do was change the way people think. And so we had what we call a buy-in process that lasted 18 months. And the buy-in process was focus groups, was conferences, was retreats, was questionnaires, etc. It was a very involved buy-in process. And what we wanted and what we ended up with is that we had a vote at our retreat, and the vote was unanimous that we adopt these open science principles. I'm going to talk to you about it in a minute. And it's very important that people buy into the idea of open science. And to do that, they need to really understand it. And I can tell you that we had the one who was the most worried and the most negative about or worried about open science now is our greatest open science advocate. And I'll talk a little bit more about what changed his mind. This idea of adopting open science was, I mean, as Uri had mentioned, we were the first institution in the world, hospital research institution in the world to adopt open science principles. And this inspired Mr. Tanenbaum, Larry Tanenbaum, who decided to give us $20 million to help us in this development of this open science. And as you'll see later on, the money is for two purposes. One is to help us become open science, because you know you're not an open science institution because one day you say you're open science. It takes a lot of work. It takes money. It takes time to make things open. Okay, and that's what part of the money is to help. The other part is to convince other institutions to be open. So this okay. So the Neuro Open Science Guiding Principles. This is important because open science means different things to different people. So we really had to define what do we mean by open science, and what are the implications, and how does it change our behavior? Well, one is the public release of data and other scientific resources, you know, transgenic mice, cell lines and stuff, no later than the time of publication. And many times we make everything available before publication. We try to encourage partnerships. So when we have a partnership with another institution, we try to encourage them to make the data that we jointly create openly available. We have a system now for sharing and stewardship of research materials and tools, so that's very important to share. Our open science is, the intellectual property is compatible with open science, and I'll talk more about that later. We're really not in favor of intellectual property like patenting at the Neuro, and I'll explain why. The fifth is very important, researcher and patient autonomy. So it means that anybody who doesn't want to follow these, wants to, you know, patent their unbelievable discovery, they can do it, and there will be no prejudice. In other words, we're not the police. We're not going to enforce open science. That's why we went through a buy-in process, so that people would adopt open science. So these are our platforms. I talked a lot about earlier the CBIG, which is the Clinical Biospecimen Imaging Genetics Repository. A lot of Parkinson's disease in this repository, but now we're spreading out to many other different diseases. And I mentioned earlier the Early Drug Discovery Unit. The Early Drug Discovery Unit has had $45 million of financing so far. So 1/3 from industry, 1/3 from philanthropy, and 1/3 from the government. So other key elements, we, as I had mentioned earlier, you know, our open science platforms are being adopted for many different activities. You know, there's like the CONP, the Canadian Open Neuroscience Platform, which is headed by Alan Evans at the Neuro. We have Neuro Hub, which is an open informatics system for analyzing data. We have the Open Meg Archive, Omega, the Open Microscopy Environment, Omero, and then we have the McGill e-scholarship repository and Dataverse. And these are all mechanisms or ways that data can be made available, and we use the FAIR principles, which is, you know, findable, accessible, and I forget what I and I are for, but that's for the data. We have the Open Science Grassroots Initiative Committee, and basically, you know, what we found was that the young people were much more knowledgeable and pro-open science than the older people. And so we created a committee to harness their ideas and their energy, and that's what we call the Grassroots Committee. We also created some prizes. There's the Neuro, Irv and Helga Cooper Foundation Open Science Prize, which is open worldwide. The first winner was at Stanford. The second winner actually was at Neuro, which is a problem in a way, but they definitely had the best. This is an international prize. Hatrock Award for Methods Development, and the Neuro Community Open Science Initiatives funding. Okay. So this is the Tanenbaum Open Science, what we call Purpose 2, which is to support open science across Canada. And so we develop seed projects, so building open science capacity. We have what we call buy-in projects, where we help other institutions have a buy-in process similar to the one that we did. And then we want to end up with a partnership of open science institutes that are all kind of working together as a model for open science. Intellectual property. Often what I've just been told. So FAIR is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So open science and intellectual property. You know, when you file a patent, it prevents others from being able to work on your thing. I'm going to give a theoretical, just a thought experiment, okay? I find that if you inhibit protein A, you prevent the spread of Parkinson's disease. It's a fantastic discovery. I patent it, I protect it. Nobody can use protein A to be able to develop drugs against that. We license it to Lilly, okay? And then Lilly tries to make a drug, but the drug doesn't work. Okay? We're 5-7 years later. So the discovery of a way to treat Parkinson's disease, it's all locked up in intellectual property. One company is developing it, and they do it for 7 years, and then they drop it. Well, Ben Stretcher's neurons are all dying, as are everybody else with Parkinson's disease during that period. So what we think it should be is that we show that you inhibit molecule A and you can stop Parkinson's disease. We make that openly available. Then 10 companies will develop drugs against protein A. And of those 10 companies, 3 will have drugs that work. And so we have drugs for Parkinson's disease that are disease modifying quicker, and different drugs that probably have different levels of efficacy and so on and so forth. That's kind of our idea of why we don't want intellectual property too early. These companies that develop the drugs, they will patent the composition of matter of the drugs they develop. That's fine. That's their stuff. That's what they do. And then they develop their drug, and then they sell it, and they make a profit, or they pay back everything that they've spent to develop the drug. That's the system. So we're not against intellectual property. We're for intellectual property at the right time, so that it doesn't prevent the rapid development of treatments. And I should say that we looked at the 15 companies, the last 15 companies that came out of the Neuro. 14 of those were know-how companies, were companies where what was important was what the researcher knew and what the researcher, the expertise of the researcher. So I think intellectual property, at least for us, isn't very useful. It doesn't have a positive impact. It only can have a negative impact. So there are different approaches, though, to open science, and I'll show you there are 3 that have been developed. There's ours, no restrictive IP, but remember that our principle 5 is that people can do what they want in the end. You know, we're not going to force them, so that's the opt-out. At the Hotchkiss Brain Institute, no IP and research supported by HBI. That's almost all the research has money at the HBI, from the HBI. The Douglas Research Center minimized the impact of IP through open licenses, transparent access, and full institutional support for those foregoing IP. So those are 3 different stances that I think are all compatible with what we do. So, you know, what was the impact of open science at the Neuro? Well, we increased funding from industry. We increased philanthropic support. Donors like open science. We have leadership in growing national and international movements. We're involved with UNESCO, Federal Roadmap. We've just been asked to do a workshop on open science for the General Assembly of the United Nations. We have new initiatives and partnerships with industry. So the neurogenomics platform, Y-Caros, Takeda, Roche, Illumina. Y-Caros I want to mention because that's kind of a brilliant thing. So I'll mention the name of the researcher. His name is, oh, I forgot his name. Anyhow, so it'll come back to me. But he's a basic scientist, and he worked to develop, one of his hobbies was looking at antibodies. And he created this Y-Caros, which is a company, if you wish, even though it's a non-profit, that will test any antibody and make all the information available. So they made partnerships. Now, 80% of all the companies that make antibodies in the world are partners of this. They donate the antibody, he tests the antibody, and he publishes openly what the antibody shows, if the antibody works or not. This is an incredibly powerful method because it's like the NIH estimates that there's $1 billion a year wasted on experiments using antibodies that don't work. And for example, for some diseases or some disease genes, they found that the 12 commercial antibodies that are sold for a certain protein, none of them work. So that means that all those papers are all false, and none of those antibodies work, and it's made open. So then the companies, any antibody that doesn't work, they take it off the market, and any protein that's important for which there's no antibody, they make new antibodies. So it's really an activity that can only happen in the open, because then everybody is all on the same page. So I think it's kind of a brilliant idea. And he's gotten millions and millions of dollars from Genome Canada, from industry, from all kinds of things. So the total project he estimates is going to cost, I think, $200 million. So that's how much money he's going to need to get, and I think he's going to get that money. So we make all our documents open. So this is where you can get these documents, our guiding principles, the buy-in process, toolkit and implementation process, open science contracts and documentation, ethical framework, and such. So these are all openly available and people can read them. So lessons learned. Well, one of the things I was always told at the beginning, it will implement open science policy, restrain young researchers to join the Neuro. No, in fact, people choose the Neuro. Young researchers choose the Neuro. over other institutions, other great institutions, because we're open, because it fits their principles. And the young scientists, very, very, very open science. So it's been a boon, not a bust, for recruitment. Will open science prevent collaboration with other stakeholders? No, we're a lot of collaborations in many, because it is open. And we also have non-traditional collaborators, like, for example, in artificial intelligence. Will ethics be an issue? No, what we do is we develop this with patients. And so the patients are part of this process. And we have a very robust ethical framework in place. And the patients are highly supportive and they feel empowered. Patients want to do something. Will farmers see the value of open science and embark? Yeah, they are embarking with a lot of money. So industry likes this. I mean, why do they like this? Well, they like it because they put in $1 and then another $10 gets put in from many other partners, including government and such. Plus, we have all the clinical data and we have the clinical material, so that's biologically relevant. And they help us, so they interact with us. And they tell us how to do the different assays. And then everything is out in the open. But they see it first, and they're happy and they believe in the quality of what's being done. Will donors embark? We've had a 400% increase in donor money since we adopted open science. Will others be reluctant to join because open science, because of our position IP? Well, there are others that have embarked. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Many have expressed an interest. And there's a very neat thing called the Stanford Center for Open and Reproducible Science. It's called CORE, C-O-R-E, S. And that is, the aim of that is to bring open science to the entire University of Stanford, which is quite interesting. So it's important that we spread the word. So we have our open science symposium every year. Last one was in November 2021. We have our open science in conversation webinars. These things are attended by hundreds of people all over the world. And we have guests from all over the world. Open science outside the neuro, well, we have, as I mentioned, the seed project, buy-in project, partnership projects, and these are just examples. So with the Douglas, we basically had a buy-in process, and so this is our partner institution, and they are really interested in more of the psychiatry, the particularities of open science in the world of psychiatry, which of course, there are many biases, and there's in psychiatry, they have special challenges. The other is, for example, to adopt and build sharing capabilities. This is with University of Western Ontario, and this is a program for sharing data on mouse work. And then, these are the different centers we're working with now: the Moafagian, the Douglas, the Western. It's called BrainCan. So in University of Western Ontario, they've brought together all of the neuroscience in one place. So Robards, psychology, and the Western are all part of this. And so these are ongoing discussions with these, and they're all kind of working to create their own versions of our open science principles. So these institutions, the first to bite the bullet is the Hotchkiss Brain Institute, and they announced in the fall that they had adopted open science principles. And what happens with this money from Tanenbaum is it's half of the money is not for us. Half of the money comes to us, and then when an institution adopts open science, we transfer the income from that to that institution. So that's kind of how that works. So that provides money for the institution to develop their open science. And this is with the Douglas. And this was just announced recently. The Douglas has adopted open science. So there are now 3 open science institutions in the world, all 3 in Canada, 2 in Montreal and 1 in Calgary, and there's more coming. So I was going to stop there, maybe a little early for some questions. Des questions, ça peut être en anglais ou en français, mais seulement anglais et français. Pas d'autres langues, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Guy. Comme tu le sais, on est un peu en discussion déjà avec Dylan et Annabelle au sujet du CEGM.
Oui.
Y a-t-il des questions pour le Dr Rouleau?
Je vais... Stop share.
Moi, j'avais une petite question sur la collaboration avec le Douglas sur le Brain Bank. C'est-à-dire que quand il y a des cerveaux qui meurent, est-ce que ça passe par le CBIG ou par le Brain Bank, ou c'est entre les deux, ou ça marche?
Le Douglas Brain Bank existe depuis belle lurette, comme vous savez. On était en discussion avec eux pour avoir des liens avec notre CBIG. On ne prend pas des cerveaux, on n'est pas un brain bank. On utilise le brain bank du Douglas et c'est un brain bank qui est ouvert. Et donc, les échantillons sont disponibles à qui les veut. Je crois qu'ils envoient 1000 par année, échantillons. Nous autres, c'est nos neuropathologistes qui travaillent avec eux pour analyser les cerveaux. Alors, ils sont très proches de nous, là. Et puis, c'est tout ouvert.
Parce que moi, on m'a contacté pour savoir s'il y avait un brain bank où on pouvait laisser des cerveaux à Montréal, donc ce serait le Douglas spécifiquement.
Ce serait le Douglas, oui. Et puis, ils font les moelles maintenant. Avant, ils faisaient seulement les cerveaux. Tu sais que ça a commencé comme un brain bank pour la démence, Alzheimer's. Dr Turaki s'est impliqué, puis c'est devenu un brain bank qui avait des contrôles et aussi étudiait, prenait des cerveaux de gens qui mouraient par suicide ou accident de voiture comme contrôle. Et puis, depuis quelques années, on a fait un arrangement avec eux, puis ils reçoivent les cerveaux et la moelle des patients avec la SLA. Et donc, ils sont cerveau, moelle, font bien ça.
Merci. Aman, you have a question?
Hi, Guy. Really nice to hear your talk. So I know this is a question you have addressed at other open science meetings, but let me ask in this audience. One of the barriers to open science, especially when the consortiums are releasing data openly for use, is the multiple levels of ethics that we have to do at our personal institutions, or if it's a multi-institution project, then at those levels. I know you have a good answer for that, or the MNI is working towards it. Would you like to enlighten us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. Ethics is very important. I mean, you can't get around the ethics. You have to follow the rules. I think what we have found is that you have to create an ethics framework, and it has to have open principles at its core, and that you start like that. You cannot do things retroactively. It's very hard to do things retroactively. You have to do it proactively. So I think, you know, our ethics framework, all of this is available, and it's very well done and well thought out, and I would encourage others to do that. There are, you know, international consortiums that had built in the notion of open science, and so that's why there are many of these that are available out there. But the problems often are all the different ethics institutions. All the institutions have different ethics committees that all put their 2 cents, and it can become incredibly complicated. I agree. But the way for us, involving patients has been kind of the game changer because it's very hard for an ethicist to tell a patient that he's protecting the patient when the patient says, no, I know exactly what's going on. This is what I want, and this is what most of the patients want. So that's the most important element in dealing with ethics.
Thank you.
Pierre,
oui, merci. En fait, je pense que c'est peut-être déjà couvert par votre réponse. Mais d'abord, merci beaucoup, c'est très inspirant. Je pense qu'effectivement, dans nos milieux aussi, à l'Institut, on voit que les jeunes sont très, très engagés dans ce cadre-là des sciences ouvertes. Peut-être une question très, très spécifique sur les données cliniques qui sont évidemment intégrées dans les données du réseau de la santé. Est-ce que donc cette discussion-là est aussi doit être faite avec le réseau de la santé, ou est-ce que simplement vous prenez les données cliniques avec l'accord des patients, vous les mettez dans votre banque et donc il y a un système parallèle qui se développe de données de recherche?
Pour nous, c'est un système parallèle. Alors, il y a un consentement. Les patients signent un consentement qui est très détaillé et qui donne permission de rendre toutes les données ouvertement disponibles. Les patients savent que, je veux dire, le nom n'est pas disponible, mais quand tu mets toutes les données génétiques et tout ça, ils savent qu'ils peuvent être identifiés potentiellement et ils sont d'accord. Donc, ça c'était le plus difficile, c'était de convaincre les comités d'éthique que les patients seraient d'accord. Et puis, on leur demande très clairement, puis je veux dire que 98% disent oui. Okay? Donc, ça, c'est important. Pour les données cliniques du réseau de la santé, ça, vous connaissez peut-être le projet de loi 19. Donc, il y a le projet de loi 19 qui vise à rendre les données cliniques de la RAMQ du gouvernement du Québec beaucoup plus facilement accessibles pour faire différents genres d'études. Et donc, ce projet de loi-là va vraiment changer l'accessibilité aux données de la RAMQ. Mais c'est un projet de loi. Et j'ai appris aujourd'hui que le projet de loi va demeurer projet de loi jusqu'à la fin de cette session. Et il va y avoir une élection. Et puis, après l'élection, on verra bien si le projet de loi va rester ou pas. Mais j'ai été très impliqué avec ce projet de loi-là parce qu'on m'a demandé de rencontrer les membres de l'Assemblée nationale et répondre des questions à ce sujet-là. Mais je pense que ce ne sera pas avant si la CAQ est réélue, et j'ai aucune idée, j'imagine qu'ils vont poursuivre. Et si la CAQ n'est pas réélue, ils vont peut-être poursuivre quand même parce que je pense que dans la machine bureaucratique, il y a une réalisation que c'est désirable d'avoir accès à ces données-là pour être capable d'améliorer la qualité de notre système de santé.
Mais donc, pratiquement, présentement, votre procédure, c'est d'obtenir l'autorisation des patients et ensuite d'aller extraire les données cliniques des dossiers patients avec leur consentement, puis de nourrir votre banque de données, donc clinique, de l'intégrer à vos bases de données.
Oui, mettre l'imagerie, et puis c'est supposé de se faire automatiquement maintenant.
Mm-hmm.
Alors, oui, mais c'est tout avec consentement.
Mm-hmm. Merci.
Gilbert Blaise. Bonjour, Gilbert.
Bonjour, Guy. Ça fait longtemps qu'on de t'écouter. Depuis, j'ai évolué dans pas mal de choses. Je m'intéresse toujours beaucoup aux douleurs complexes, comme tu sais, et je vais partir en essai bientôt, dépendant du financement que je vais avoir, pour traiter des pathologies complexes, en particulier le complexe renal pain syndrome. Comme tu sais, ça existe depuis 1550 qu'on a vu ce syndrome pour la première fois, qu'on n'a jamais trouvé de traitement. Donc, et basé sur mon attitude à traiter des patients en dernier recours, j'ai trouvé un système pour traiter ces choses-là. Alors, je demandais si votre système ouvert serait intéressé à ce que je puisse parler avec toi, avec d'autres personnes du réseau, que si la douleur est quelque chose qui vous intéresse particulièrement ou bien si c'est d'autres syndromes plus particuliers.
Bien, certainement, on serait prêt à discuter. On a notre unité de recherche clinique qui, je crois, fait des études sur la douleur déjà en lien avec notre centre de douleur.
Oui.
Ben, pas besoin de vous dire, vous connaissez ça mieux que moi, là, mais la douleur, c'est la numéro 1 cause ou raison pour laquelle quelqu'un va voir son médecin.
Ah,
donc, la douleur et améliorer la qualité des traitements de douleur, c'est certainement quelque chose très désirable. Et ce serait bien si ça serait fait dans le monde ouvert ou de façon ouverte. Un des avantages de ouvert, c'est que les données sont immédiatement disponibles et les gens, ils peuvent valider eux-mêmes. Et donc, c'est une très bonne façon de convaincre les gens de la véracité de nos travaux puis des conclusions.
Merci pour ta réponse. Je veux dire aussi la douleur, c'est la première raison pour les gens perdent leur autonomie vont à CHLSD au Québec.
Okay. Ouais, ça, je peux croire. OK, excellent. Alors,
merci, à bientôt. Merci.
À bientôt. Alors, Dr Gilles Lavigne, heureux de te voir.
Muito obrigado, Guy. Tu as demandé qu'on parle pas d'autre langue que l'anglais.
Oui, c'est ça. Dire portugais, mon portugais n'est pas très, très bon, un peu rouillé.
Guy, je relance, j'avais 2 points, mais mon premier point était sur le point de Pierre. Comme tu sais, il y a plusieurs professionnels de la santé, je pense aux physiothérapeutes, beaucoup de psychologues, ergo, qui suivent les patients autour de l'axe neuro ou des maladies associées au vieillissement. Il y a beaucoup de données qui se perdent dans le système actuel, qui ne sont pas reliées aux données du gouvernement. Si on parle d'open science, moi, quand je parle aux patients, ils me disent « Oui, mais je suis nulle part, je n'existe pas là. » Est-ce que c'est une avenue que l'open science va éventuellement essayer de couvrir?
Oui, bien, je pense que dans la présentation, on a construit le système pour être capable d'avoir des données de psychologie, neuropsychologie, etc. Je pense que c'est un problème pas de vouloir, mais plutôt de faire les liens et être capable de capturer les données. Alors, nous autres, si c'est dans le record médical, on peut le capturer. Et puis ça, on va avoir ça avec plusieurs domaines, mais beaucoup de la psychologie, par exemple, est faite dans les cabinets privés. Donc, je pense qu'il faudrait des efforts spéciaux pour être capable d'attirer. Mais l'exception, c'est peut-être les maladies neurodéveloppementales et l'autisme. On a un projet qui s'appelle le Q1K, le Québec 1000, qui est un projet multicentre qui implique le leadership est au neuro, mais ça implique le neuro, le restant du CUSUM, le Douglas, le Saint-Justine, Québec, Sherbrooke, CHIO à Ottawa et aussi Laurent Motron je suis trop certain du nouveau nom là, de Houillet, mais Laurent Motron. Et puis là-dedans, il y a beaucoup de données en psychologie, il va y avoir des données de...
Donc, ça ne se perd pas.
Ça ne se perd pas, mais c'est dans des projets spéciaux. On a la capacité de chercher l'information et de le mettre en storage. Mais donc, ce projet-là, ça marche. Mais il y en a beaucoup qu'on ne va pas capturer. Ça, c'est sûr.
Puis mon deuxième point, c'était certains de mes collègues disent « Oui, mais je suis open science parce que je publie dans des open access. »
Oui,
ça, c'est un bon clarifier point. Que ce n'est pas toujours la même chose.
Oui. Ah non, c'est un bon point. Alors, il y a beaucoup de gens il y a beaucoup de bruit à propos de open access. Et puis, open access, essentiellement, c'est un conflit entre les gens qui publient et qui veulent faire de l'argent et les gens qui payent pour la recherche, si vous voulez, et puis les chercheurs. Alors, pour donner un exemple, Nature, eux, ils reçoivent les travaux des chercheurs et ils n'ont pas payé pour la recherche. Et puis là, ils envoient ça pour être revu par des chercheurs qui ne sont pas payés pour revoir la qualité. Et là, le chercheur signe un transfert de copyright. Et puis là, Nature appartient le papier. et puis là, ils le revendent. Alors, eux, ils n'ont rien fait. Ils font juste faire de l'argent. C'est des machines à faire de l'argent. Et ça bloque accès à l'information à des gens qui ne peuvent pas payer ou ils ne veulent pas payer. Donc, l'open access, c'est vraiment accès aux publications. Nous autres, quand on parle de sciences ouvertes, on parle de non seulement les publications, mais les données brutes.
Exactement. C'est pour ça que j'insistais là-dessus, parce que dans le milieu académique, il y a des gens qui mêlent encore. Puis un des problèmes, comme tu sais, je travaille dans un autre pays avec un dollar qui vaut 4 fois moins chez eux, là. Et pour eux, l'open access publié dans tous ces Frontier et al., c'est out of frontier. C'est totalement financièrement inaccessible, là.
Oui, et puis
là,
ça,
il y a un gros problème de ce côté-là. Fait que pour moi, l'open access, il n'est pas vraiment open, là.
Il n'est pas encore open access. Non, c'est un work in progress. Mais disons, la pression sur les gens qui publient, les compagnies qui publient augmente et ça vient de tout partout. Donc, à un certain stade, je crois que ça va tout devenir open. Mais c'est comme un peu le conflit, c'est les publications qui ont les plus gros facteurs d'impact que les chercheurs veulent le plus publier parce que c'est important pour leur carrière. C'est eux qui, disons, ils ont le gros bout du bâton. Et donc, c'est là où c'est le conflit. Mais je pense que nous autres, on focus plus sur accès aux données, accès aux biomatériaux, les souris transgéniques.
C'est très, très clair, mais je pense qu'il ne faut jamais oublier qu'il faut mêler les deux.
C'est une composante de sciences ouvertes. Mais
pour beaucoup de gens dans le milieu académique, ce n'est pas toujours clair.
Oui, il y a beaucoup de confusion là-dessus. Je suis d'accord.
Merci.
Aman?
So this is more of a omics kind of open science question.
Yeah.
I wonder what the Neuro is doing to facilitate partnerships between academics and companies, because oftentimes when I work with governmental agencies for omics studies or something, they're very reluctant to release the entire important data set because the mentality or the thinking is that, and in their experience, they're quite experienced with this, is that the drug companies then take this data and since they have so much more funding, they move with it very fast and the academics are left behind. So while I'm very pro open science myself, it's really helped me out during the pandemic, I wonder if there could be some facilitations going on for academics and industry to work together as opposed to be in competition on those fronts.
Yeah, so we've found that industry is very interested in open science, and there's an open science movement within industry to make data more openly available and such. So industry is moving in that direction, but they're not there yet, but they're moving in that direction. You know, if we create a data set, I mean, I think it is reasonable to keep the data set private for a certain period of time to allow people to be able to, you know, mine the gold, if you wish. The idea, though, is that the data set should not be kept private for a long period of time because that data set would allow others to ask other questions. And I can give a nice example of a researcher at the Neuro that we recruited. You know, he did his PhD and he published 3 papers and he did electrophysiology stuff, put everything on the web, everything was available. There were 7 other papers written using his data, asking questions he wasn't asking, that he didn't think of. And so it's an increase in the amount of discovery, if you wish, or knowledge by having made his information available. But, you know, we are conscious that sometimes there needs to be a small delay or a delay before the data is made available so that people can mine the data. But the principle has to be that it will become available and not in a long period of time, not 10 years, you know, a short period of time.
Thank you.
Benjamin Pajot.
Bonjour, merci pour votre présentation vraiment super intéressante. J'ai une question sur, enfin c'est plus une question, c'est à mi-question, mi-commentaire en lien avec l'échange sur l'open access, là, pas l'open science, mais l'open access. Je voudrais votre point de vue sur la place des préprints, parce que souvent les préprints ou les post-prints nous permettent d'avoir le texte, le contenu pas mis en forme par le journal, complètement accessible. Est-ce que ça, c'est reconnu officiellement comme étant une publication open access? Je m'explique, je fais un préprint, c'est publié dans un journal qui demande de payer pour accéder. Cependant, on ne peut pas accéder à la version finale du journal, mais on peut accéder au préprint qui a le contenu identique. Est-ce que ça, par les agences gouvernementales, c'est suffisamment reconnu comme open access?
Mais c'est une bonne question. Moi, qu'est-ce que les gouvernements, l'opinion des gouvernements, ça, je ne le sais pas et ça risque d'être différent de différents gouvernements, mais mon opinion, qui n'est pas un gouvernement, mais je crois que la réponse à Open Access, c'est exactement ce que vous dites, c'est bioarchive, c'est les journaux, c'est les preprints. Alors, nous autres, on met tout dans les preprints. Et ça veut dire que les données sont accessibles. C'est vrai que ce n'est pas nécessairement la forme finale et il n'y a pas eu de peer review, ce qui peut être un problème pour certaines choses. Mais si tu fais un certain travail, il y a un preprint, il y a un peer review. Généralement, le peer review ne va pas faire des changements majeurs dans le papier. Le papier, l'histoire du papier reste pareil. Et puis là, ils ont accès à travers le bioarchive. Alors, je trouve que c'est une bonne solution. Et je crois qu'ultimement, ça va mettre énormément de pression sur les compagnies qui publient. Et puis, même les compagnies qui publient pas open access, il y en a qui ont des politiques qu'ils rendent open access au bout de 6 mois ou 1 an, des choses comme ça. Alors, je pense que on s'en va dans cette direction-là, mais les preprints, brillant. C'est brillant.
Parce que les preprints, on peut, pour aller même plus loin, on peut soumettre la version, par exemple, si je suis en R1, R2 dans le journal en révision 1 ou 2, je peux soumettre ma version soumise au moment de la fin de la R2, ce qui fait qu'en gros, je vais avoir la version à 99% identique, en fait.
Oui, moi, je trouve que c'est brillant, là. C'est un très bon. Il faudrait, mais je pense que le site qui a le plus de publications au monde, c'est bioarchives. Alors, je ne suis pas le seul à aimer bioarchives.
Merci.
Bon, merci encore, Guy. C'était vraiment informatif. Et puis, on va continuer donc à collaborer entre nos deux institutions. Je voudrais vous remercier tous et vous convier à la 3e conférence Prestige qui aura lieu le 16 juin avec Michael Mihalidis, directeur de HR. Merci encore, Guy. À une prochaine.
Merci.